We are starting with slide number 24 from the chapter 28 slides. And we are starting with the phylum Mollusca. Mollusca means soft body. All the mollusks have three parts to their body that you need to be familiar with. You need to know they all contain a visceral mass, a mantle, and a foot. Now, the visceral mass, viscera just means internal organs in general. So the viscera in humans is like the stomach and the liver and all of those organs that are in the abdominal cavity and your heart and your lungs. So viscera just refers to the collection of internal organs. So they have a visceral mass. They have a mantle, which may secrete a shell and may not. Some of them have a shell and some do not. And then they have a foot, which is in very loosely defined foot because does not always function as a foot, but it's a muscle that's adapted either for locomotion, attachment, or food capture. This is the body plan of a typical mollusk. What you're looking at here looks like a snail. It does have a shell. You can see the mantle is under the shell. So the purpose of the mantle is to secrete the shell if they have one. And you can see all the viscera here. You can see a stomach, and all the green is the intestines. So you have all the digestive tract going from the mouth all the way to the anus. You have a primitive heart and some blood vessels that open into like an open space. So it's not a closed circulatory system like the one that we have, but it's an open circulatory system. But you see a lot of organs and organ systems in here. And then the foot, the muscular foot, is actually on the stomach. The snail is in a group of mollusks called the gastropods, which means stomach-footed. And you can see why. So that's the body plan. And again, like I said before, the circulatory system of the mollusk is open. And so they don't have blood, they have hemolymph. So they do have a primitive heart, and that heart pumps hemolymph through blood vessels, or through, it's just vessels because they don't have blood, into an open space called a hemocoel. Bivalves are mollusks that have two shells, and they include clams, oysters, mussels, and scallops. And if you don't know what a mussel is, it's a freshwater clam. They do not have cephalization. In other words, they don't have much of a head region, and they do have an open circulatory system like we just talked about. I love scallops to eat, but I also love the shells. When I go to the beach and I collect shells, they're my favorite shell to collect, are scallop shells. But this is a scallop that's showing you the animal inside. And what's really, really cool is they have, on top and bottom, they have this row of many, many eyes, and they're all blue. And then you have a picture of mussels, and then you have the picture of a clam as far as the inside of it. So we have bivalves, the class Bivalvia, and then now we're looking at the class Gastropoda, or the gastropods, which means stomach-footed, and it includes the slugs. So some of these do have a shell and some don't. It includes slugs, snails, whelks, conchs, which I get confused. A lot of people get those two confused, whelks and conchs. And then limpets and nudibranchs. And they do have a well-developed head region. Here you see the flamingo tongue shell, this is a nudibranch. I think that's this H is silent, I think. This is a land snail. And then we have the class Cephalopoda, which means head-footed. So all of these have a big head. And that's going to include the squid, cuttlefish, and octopus. And the plural for octopus is octopi. they do have well-developed sense organs. Particularly the octopus and the cuttlefish are very smart. They're very smart. You can search YouTube videos and see how they find ways to get out of mazes and different things like that. How to get out of a jar that has a cap on it, or to unscrew the cap from a jar and get inside of it where there's food. They're very, very smart. So here you see a chambered nautilus, which does have a shell, but the squid and the octopus and the cuttlefish don't have a shell. So back to the mollusk, just to make sure that you know everything you need to know about the mollusks. They all have soft bodies. They've all got a visceral mass, mantle, and foot. But the phylum Mollusca is divided into 3 classes. We have the class Bivalvia, which is the clams, oysters, mussels, and scallops. We have the class Gastropoda, which are slugs, snails, whelks, conchs, limpets, and nudibranchs. And then we have the class Cephalopoda, which are the squid, cuttlefish, octopus, and chambered nautilus. Now we're going to move on to a different phylum, the phylum Annelida. These are the segmented worms. They do have a hydrostatic skeleton, which is a fluid-filled body cavity or fluid-filled coelom, and helps them in moving, helps them in movement. They have unlike the mollusk, which had an open circulatory system, they have a closed. They do have a complete digestive tract, which means they have 2 openings, a mouth and an anus. So did the mollusk. They have, now comparing this to humans have a dorsal hollow nerve cord. In other words, our spinal nerve cord is in our back. So it's dorsal, and it's hollow instead of solid. So annelids have a ventral solid nerve cord, and that means their nerve cord runs along their stomach. Even though I gave you the example of an earthworm, which is fresh, terrestrial and fresh water, most of the annelids are actually marine organisms, meaning that they live in salt water. They're divided into 2 types, depending on whether they have many setae or bristles or few. So oligochaetes have few setae and polychaetes have many. Examples of annelids include the earthworms, leeches, and marine polychaetes like clamworms. Earthworms have a complete digestive system, meaning they have 2 openings, a mouth and an anus. They have nephridia, which means that they have kind of like a primitive kidneys. And this is interesting, they're hermaphrodites, meaning that they have both male and female reproductive organs. When they mate, they both receive sperm into their bodies, and they also both donate sperm to each other. So when they mate, they lie parallel to each other, facing opposite directions. They have a segment that's very thick in the middle of their body. It's called a clitellum that secretes mucus, which protects the sperm from drying out or desiccation. And so they just line up, and they both of them release sperm into each other, and both of them receive the other one's sperm. You can see that they're very complex. This is the clitellum. They have a crop and a gizzard, kind of like birds. The crop stores food and the gizzard grinds up the food. They need a gizzard because they eat dirt, and so they need something that can grind up, all of that and obtain nutrients from it. All right, some of the other annelids besides the earthworms, most annelids are actually marine polychaetes. That means they have many, many setae in bundles on parapodia. Hopefully there's a picture. Yeah, here you go. So the parapodia contain the setae on the end. And here's a picture of a leech. So clamworms are examples of marine polychaetes, and they are predators. Leeches are usually found in fresh water, and they would be oligochaetes because they don't have any CT at all. But they do have two additional suckers. One, what they do is that they attach, and they also release an anticoagulant in their saliva that keeps the blood from clotting. Then we move on to the flatworms. The flatworms are phylum Platyhelminthes, which literally means flatworm. Platy means flat, helminthes means worm. They don't have specialized circulatory or respiratory structures. They only have one opening, so they have what's called an incomplete digestive system, and they don't have a coelom or body cavity. This is a planarian, which is a freshwater flatworm. You can see it has a head region. It's got some eye spots that are sensitive to light, and auricles, which are sensitive to touch and pressure. I'm not sure about sound, but definitely vibrations. They have a ladder type, or the planarian has a ladder type nervous system. It's a hermaphrodite, like the earthworms, and it can reproduce asexually by regeneration. I mean, you can cut planaria up into pieces, and they'll, if you've cut them in the right way, I guess, they will regenerate. I mean, if you cut them in half, then the half with the head will grow a tail, and the half with the tail will grow a head. There are some, now planaria are not parasites or disease-causing, they're harmless, but there are parasitic flatworms, of course. There's flukes and tapeworms, and the name for fluke is trematode, and the name for tapeworm is cestode. They don't have a head region, so there's a loss of cephalization in the parasitic flatworms. Here you see the life cycle of a blood fluke. This one has a snail host and a human host, and of course the human gets it from water. And then tapeworms, you may have heard of the pork tapeworm, which basically will form a cyst and lodge in the muscle tissue of the pork, and then when you eat it, if you don't cook it enough or hot enough, then the cyst will survive, and once it will attach to your intestines, and then the tapeworm will begin to grow. So the pork tapeworm has a human host and a pig host. Then we have the phylum Rotifera, which includes the rotifers, and they are microscopic in size. You have to use a microscope to see them. They're very small, but they're really cool. If you want to look up a YouTube video of rotifers, they're really, really cool to watch. Their head region has a crown of cilia called the corona, and it's like a rotating wheel that has cilia attached to it. And it helps them move, and it also helps direct food to their mouth. And this is what they look like. And if you see them, if you see a video of rotifers, they are kind of like transparent. You can see their organs, you know. But this is the corona, you know, covered in cilia, and it just rotates. And it helps them, again, it helps them to move, and it helps them to feed. Then we have the ecdysozoans. So what we were just looking at was the Lophotrochozoans, and particularly we focused on the trochozoans, which are invertebrates that do not shed their outer covering periodically. They don't have a cuticle that they shed periodically. And so our trochozoans our examples were the mollusk, the flatworms or Platyhelminthes, the annelids, the rotifers. Now for the ecdysozoans, our examples are going to be roundworms or nematodes and arthropods. So what they all have in common is that they have a cuticle that covers their body, and they shed it periodically. And the roundworms are phylum Nematoda. They are non-segmented worms, and they include parasitic worms, although some are not parasitic, but they include parasitic roundworms like heartworms. And also the one that causes the disease elephantiasis. And you can see a picture here of someone who has that disease and how swollen it will cause edema in like the area where that's infected. So you can see how swollen his foot and leg are. These are heartworms here on the left. Okay. And then we have the phylum Arthropoda, or the arthropods, and I'll end here, and the next recording will be about we'll start here with the arthropods, slide number 55.